Good morning. This is retired Pastor Karl Schmidt from Calvary Lutheran Church, Little Lutheran Church in Amherst, New York, just outside of Buffalo. We welcome you to our broadcast this morning, this October 9th, 2022, the 17th Sunday after the Feast of Holy Trinity. And the text this morning is from the Gospel of Luke, the 14th chapter, verses 1 through 11. It's a story of Jesus on a Sabbath day who goes out visiting and has some interesting conversations. And it came to pass, as he went into the house of one of the chief Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath day, that they watched him. And behold, there was a certain man before him which had the dropsy. And Jesus answering spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? And they held their peace. And he took him and healed him, and let him go. And answering them, saying, Which of you shall have a donkey or an ox fallen into a pit, will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they did not answer him according to these things. And he put forth a parable to those which were invited to the feast, and he marked how they chose out the nicest room, saying to them, When you're invited by a man to a wedding, do not sit in the fanciest place, but rather let a more honorable man than you be invited by him to that place. And he that invited you will come and say to you, Here, why don't you take the better place in the better room? But when you are invited to, go and sit in the lowest room, that when he bids you that comes, he may say unto you, Friend, go up higher, and you shall have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with you. For whoever exalts himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Well, this is a rather confusing sounding story, actually. Jesus is talking to some people who think that they have an understanding of the law. And it would seem that they do. These are, as the text says, they're lawyers and Pharisees. A lawyer is obviously a lawyer, but a Pharisee is not a category we go around have much anymore. But 2,000 years ago, a Pharisee was someone who was a layman, not a pastor or a professional cleric among the Jews. A Pharisee was a layman who worked hard, and took care of their family, followed the rules, followed the laws, and was religious, went to the temple, and took care of things at the temple and in the community. Respectable person. Who did what he seemed to think was right. So these people, both the lawyers and the Pharisees, dedicated their lives to studying the law and knowing the law, and then, as best as they could, or wanted to, following the law. And something that needs to be understood, too, a lot of times people who are not Jewish are unfamiliar with the Jewish position on the law. Some people might mistakenly think that it's a very rigid observance. It's not. There's writings called the Mishnah, the oral law, which stands next to the Torah, the written law. And the neither one is actually that rigid in its application, especially in the Mishnah, the oral law. There's an English copy, if you're interested, from Oxford Press, written by Danby, about maybe 100 plus years ago. And there's modern English editions of the Mishnah, the oral law of the Jews. And in this, it gives all sorts of exceptions to the Sabbath, as far as the kind of work that is permitted on the Sabbath. So when Jesus meets with these people and asks them the simple question, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? The answer was, from any reading of the Mishnah and the Torah, or studying the Gemara, the sermons and the musings on the law and the prophets, that the answer would obviously be yes, of course it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath day. And in the oral law of the Jews, the Mishnah, There are many, many examples. I'm sure there's more than hundreds of examples in there of cases in which it's lawful. For instance, if you're caring for a person who's sick, whether they're temporarily sick or chronically sick, of course you have to work. Healing is the kind of work, you see. And the question really is it lawful to work on the Sabbath day? And some with a cursory or a faulty understanding would say no. But yes, and of course it was legal, lawful to work on the Sabbath day. Many kinds of work were necessary. Jesus points out cases here. If there's an accident, do you help someone who's had an accident, even if it's an animal? And the answer, of course, you help, because God did not permit animals to suffer, animal cruelty. That's never been allowed. It's always been prohibited. And so even if an animal needs help, that it's required to do what one can to assist. And for instance, if one is pregnant, one cannot fast on the Sabbath day. One cannot fast at any time, because that wouldn't be healthy for the mother or the child. So, I mean, there are, again, hundreds of cases where it is necessary to do all kinds of work on the Sabbath day, even though the definition of Sabbath is to rest. And so this is not prohibited. It's not a rigid understanding of the law at all. The idea of the law here in the Torah and in the Mishnah, the oral law, the spoken, handed-down law of the Jews, is an idea of compassion and flexibility. And so Jesus' question to these lawyers and Pharisees, in other words, these fine, upstanding people of the community here, professional men, in Jesus' day they would typically have been men, for the most part. Not exclusively, but for the most part. It was not simply a man's society. Women were businesswomen back in that day too, and well educated. So against some of the common misconceptions of modern people. But the question is, why were they silent? Why didn't they answer Jesus? And verse 4 it says, and they held their peace. And in verse 6, even after he asked them about being kind to an animal that had an accident, verse 6, and they could not or did not answer him according to these things. So the question really amounts to, why? These people know what the right answer is. They know that, of course, compassion and flexibility are the essence of what's built into the law in Jesus' day among the Jews. So that there's no rigid adherence. But he's not really asking them about these types of questions, really, is he? It's not as though he's simply asking them little test questions. Something else is at stake, and the reason that they don't answer obvious questions whose answer is obvious. Anyone in their day could have obviously answered those questions. So why didn't they? Why did they hold silent? Probably because of a deeper reason, that the real meaning of the law is what they did not want to get into. They did not want to begin questioning what the law means between God and man. And this is the real measure of this text. Yes, in these little cases here, dealing with someone who's sick, do you care for them, whether it's a Sabbath or a holy day or not? Of course you do. Do you stop preparing food for someone who's pregnant and maybe bedridden? Of course you don't stop preparing food, even though it involves what would otherwise be forbidden degrees of work on a day where rest is simply required. It's a time where everyone was simply told, just stop basically most of what you're doing. Not everything. Wasn't illogical, but it was meant to give everyone a break, a rest, when life is known to be otherwise hectic and troublesome. And so, since the answers are obvious, since the answers could have been answered by a child, then why do they not give an answer? Well, I think the reason really amounts to a deeper issue. Rather, whether it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath day, obviously the answer is yes. A clear answer is yes. It's not even interpretation. It's written down in the explanation of the law, in the oral law, in the Torah, and in the Gemaras, that yes, of course, it's required to help, to show compassion, and etc. But to understand the law and its nuances, where this question is really heading, you see, this is one of those questions that starts a conversation. Where the question is really heading is what is the human position before God under the law? This is a completely different issue. This takes us to a different place, because it's not asking about particular action on a particular day and whether or not something is permitted or not permitted. This question, what does the law say to man? Who speaks the law? What is the law? First off, who speaks it? It's not a word spoken from one man to another, as are human laws, civic laws, moral laws, things like this, where people derive ethics from like Kantian logic. That which is right is that which is useful, utilitarian to all people in all places at all times, as an example of an ethical standard. No, that's something derived by logic among people. The real issue at stake here is, what does God have to say to humans in this thing called law, Torah? Here is a different idea. Here's a different answer. We don't really know. See, we know a clear answer. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Sure. But if you go deeper into the law, you discover that we don't really know what it is. Is it really a shopping list of right and wrong things? No, that's not the law. This is a voice of God spoken from God toward humans. And for instance, when God says to the man, ancient man, walk with me and be thou perfect, Abraham, what does that mean? We don't even understand the idea of being perfect. We don't understand. Because we're flawed. We're broken. Even the philosophers get this. The finite is not possible to comprehend the infinite, because we're finite. Of course we can't comprehend the infinite. It makes no sense. Just like we can't understand a word spoken from God toward us about being perfect, about standing before Him, and in the Hebrew it's tzaddik. In the Greek it's dikaiosune, to be righteous, to be standing before God in perfect love. What does this mean? I have no idea. Simply because I've lived in the world of sin, the world of brokenness, my whole life. So have you. And how would we even imagine what this being, who we call God, means by this? And the thou shalt. There's a terrifying idea. Thou shalt? What? God demands? On top of His demands, He places guilt that He judges, He decides, not us. On top of that, he places punishment, mut, death. Mut is Hebrew for death. In Greek, thanatos, death. This is God's standard for that which is not righteous before him. And again, I don't even know what that would be, to be righteous before this being. It's not like you just go through life following a little laundry list or grocery list of all the things that you're supposed to do and not doing the things you're not supposed to do. Because even when you try to do something right, your heart doesn't really want to. I mean, you follow the speed limit, you go down the road, it's 35 miles an hour posted, that's what you try to do. And even though the car sometimes does 37 or 34, it never exactly goes 35. You'd really like to get to some open road, even though it's usually only 55, and then really open it up just to see what that motor will do, and see how the car handles, like some Indianapolis driver in the racetrack. But you can't do that. It's not safe. It wouldn't be safe for yourself or others because passenger cars aren't designed for that. They're really only designed to go the posted limits. Even though it's possible to go faster, they're not designed for that. Not safely. So, you look at this idea of law, and we don't, even if we follow law, we don't want to. We'd rather just wind out the motor and see what that baby will do. But, you see, so even following the law in a casual manner is not from the heart. And there's no reward attached to the law. It's not like the law says, do this and you will live. No, because we can't, from the heart and from the actions, follow whatever the law really is. All that follows after that is death, because that's the condemnation of the law. That's the judgment of the one who speaks the law, death. And so all human beings die. It's just how it goes. Now, if this were the end of it, religion would really stink. I mean, I wouldn't want anything to do with religion if that was the end of it, because really? I mean, what's the point of that? That's like everyone running toward a cliff. That's a bad idea. I mean, that's stupid. So why would religion be any use to us if all it tells us is gloom and doom? Nothing. But see, Jesus didn't go to these people's home to simply fill his stomach to have a meal. He wanted to discuss something with them. He wanted to tell them that the law is not the measure of what God has to say to human beings. There's a completely different word that God speaks. And from the very beginning had spoken, even to Moses. When you look at Psalm 90, a psalm of Moses, the second half of Psalm 90 is about mercy. It's about God's kindness and peace that comes to us not from the law, because by the law, and as Psalm 90 points out, all flesh is like the grass and withers and dies. That's the law and its penalty, death. But under God's mercy and kindness, we live forever. We would dwell in the house of the Lord forever, as the 23rd Psalm ends. Because you see, the scriptures have always been about the second message from God, the second voice, which tells us from the very beginning that God has not designed us to live according to the law, but he's designed us to live according to compassion, mercy, kindness, peace. These are the things that even the law acknowledges. The law, that's why Jesus' question is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Technically, it wouldn't be, but in practicality, of course it is. And so even the law acknowledges compassion and mercy. But the being, this God who speaks to humans, he's designed the actual message from himself to us to be built around compassion, mercy. And this is why he sent his son Jesus to procure for us compassion and mercy, to provide for us. How in particular? Well, you could say that Jesus followed the law, but again, That's only because he is God and true man. Not something we can even imagine. We don't quite understand it. How would we understand that? Again, the mortal doesn't understand the immortal. How would we? And the issues involved. It would be trite to say that we do understand. One would be a liar and a fool to say that. Instead, we simply lean, trust, cast our hopes. You call it faith. Faith is to be convinced. Comes from the Greek pistoio. Faith in Greek comes from the pistos. Patho is the root, to be convinced of something, which is simply to be convinced that God is kind and merciful. That God takes the law breaker, the one who fails before the law, forgives him, has kindness. And this is why Jesus went to the cross, died on the cross. And again, something else that I don't know if we'll ever quite understand, but that the Father accepted his death to be ours, to his sacrifice to be sufficient for us. How so? I don't know. Beats me. It's just that this is this being who we call God, how he designed it. Fine with me. So, that's the message here of this text about a simple question of the law that should have been easy to answer, and they declined to answer because they knew it would lead to a different discussion, a discussion that they did not want to have, that their lives built around trying to live under the law weren't going to go really anywhere, and instead that God had always, from the very beginning, directed people away from the law to his mercy, to his kindness, to his forgiveness, which in his Son, Jesus, is fulfilled. And so this is for all. It's a gift. It's a gift. That's all it is. It's just his gift to the world. Is there anything we have to do to deserve and earn this? No, not even possible. He just simply announces it, and by his own announcement in the gospel, and it's good news, that's it. It's yours. Finished. So, enjoy it. And at the same time, a standard for living becomes the gospel. So kindness, mercy, peacefulness, gentleness, these then, as St. Paul said, against these there is no law, because these provide a good way of living. Okay, well, again, this has been retired Pastor Karl Schmidt for Calvary Lutheran Church. Hope you have a good day. The new booster is out. If you're eligible for that, go get it. I got mine. And so this is, I think, the fifth shot, the 2 originals and the 3 boosters. So hopefully this will keep us safe from COVID. Be kind, do the best you can as far as public health. So take care.